Luca Moretti had spent 12 years chasing political corruption, financial scandals, and corporate cover-ups, but nothing prepared him for the anonymous message that arrived in his encrypted inbox at 3 in the morning. It contained no greeting, no signature, just a single line of text followed by an attachment. If you want to understand Italy's economy, follow the Valentis. Luca frowned at the name. Valenti, it meant nothing to him. No ministers, no CEOs, no major industrial families carried it. Yet the attachment was a meticulously organized spreadsheet listing dozens of companies, banks, real estate firms, and cultural foundations. At first glance, they appeared unrelated. Some were giants of Italian industry, others small regional businesses. But one column kept catching his eye. Those responsible for establishing, refinancing, or rescuing these companies all shared the same surname, Valenti. Curious but skeptical, Luca dove into research the next morning. The deeper he dug, the stranger everything became. Records showed a Valenti had quietly funded the reconstruction of a shipping company after World War II. Another Valenti had orchestrated the merger that saved a major bank in the 1970s. Yet another seemed to have provided seed capital to a modern tech firm that later became a national leader. And each time, after intervening, the Valenti involved vanished from public documents. No photographs, no interviews. As if each family member stepped into history only long enough to pull a thread and then disappeared back into the dark. Luca initially assumed the Valentis were simply an old money family with an unusual taste for anonymity. Italy had many such clans. But the timing of the message coincided with a brewing financial scandal in Rome. 3 major corporations were caught manipulating government contracts, causing a minor market panic. While investigating them, Luca found something chilling. Every one of the implicated companies had, at some point in the past 40 years, been bailed out or reorganized under the guidance of a Valenti-linked entity. Coincidence? Maybe. But then there was the final detail in the spreadsheet. Valenti Holdings S.p.A. It was listed as the central hub connecting all the other companies. Yet when Luca searched for it, the firm appeared strangely hollow. Its website was rudimentary. Its annual reports were thin, generic, free of detail. Its headquarters, according to public documents, was a rural villa in Tuscany, not an office tower. Not a financial district address. A villa. The more Luca examined the puzzle, the more he sensed deliberate design. Someone, perhaps generations of someones, had spent decades removing the family from public visibility while constructing a vast lattice of influence under the surface. Still, Luca wasn't convinced. Conspiracies were easy to imagine and even easier to misinterpret. But then, as if fate wanted to nudge him forward, he stumbled upon a decades-old article from a defunct economic journal. It made a passing reference to the discreet but stabilizing hand of Bianca Valenti during Italy's inflation crisis in the 1980s. His heartbeat quickened. There it was, the first verifiable mention of a Valenti involved in national economic events. Suddenly, the anonymous message didn't feel like a prank. It felt like an invitation. And Luca Moretti had never been able to resist an invitation into the unknown. Luca Moretti had filled 2 whiteboards in his apartment with everything he'd gathered on the Valenti's dates. Mergers, buyouts, obscure company names, but the board dedicated to ownership structure remained frustratingly empty. No matter how far he traced the corporate lineages, no Valenti ever appeared in the official paperwork. The family seemed to operate behind a hall of mirrors, always visible in the reflection but never standing in the room. Determined to crack the pattern, Luca began compiling a map of interconnected businesses. He started with 10 companies from the original spreadsheet, then expanded to 20, then to 50. The deeper he went, the more uncanny the connections became. The Valentis had their fingerprints everywhere: shipping, steel, telecommunications. Energy grids, finance, pharmaceuticals, agriculture. Not controlling stakes, but timely interventions. A quiet investment when a factory was about to shut down. A low-profile loan during a recession. A strategic acquisition just before a boom. It seemed as though the family appeared precisely when Italy's economy was about to shift, nudging events in a favorable direction and then disappearing before anyone asked questions. Every trail he followed eventually narrowed toward the same place, Valenti Holdings S.p.A. On paper, it was a modest management consultancy with barely 20 employees. Yet its influence reached into every major sector of the country. Strange inconsistencies appeared in public filings, lists of board members who never appeared in public, subcontractors with no digital footprint, consultants whose resumes evaporated beyond a certain year. It was as though someone had scrubbed the past clean. Luca dug into the executives allegedly running the firm. One, Marco D. Ferri, was listed as the Director of Strategic Operations. A simple reverse image search revealed the profile photo was stock footage of a middle-aged businessman sold on multiple websites. Another executive's listed address belonged to a bakery in Milan. Yet another appeared on paper as the CEO of 3 unrelated charities, all dissolved the same year. This was no ordinary company. It was camouflage. The next logical step was to visit the headquarters. Luca rented a car and drove through winding Tuscan hills toward the small town of Monte Castello. The villa that served as Valenti Holdings base didn't look like a corporate center. It looked like an estate owned by old nobility. Tall cypress trees lined the long driveway, and stone statues guarded the entrance, faded by weather and time. A modest brass plate near the gate read, Valenti Holdings S.p.A. Private property. Visitors by appointment only. Luca buzzed the intercom. After a long silence, a calm male voice answered. Good afternoon. How may we assist you? He introduced himself as a journalist requesting an interview. The voice replied politely but firmly that no interviews were given. The tone was civil, yet carried a hint of trained precision, like someone accustomed to handling unwelcome inquiries. Luca tried to press, mentioning the companies, the economic interventions. The voice went silent for a beat, too long to be natural, and then replied, We advise you to direct financial questions to the Ministry of Economy. This property is private. Moments later, the iron gate clicked shut electronically. That night, after returning to Florence, Luca entered his hotel room and froze. His suitcase had been moved. His laptop was slightly open. Nothing was missing, but someone had gone through his things. A warning not loud, but unmistakable. And for the first time, Luca truly understood. He wasn't investigating a family. He was trespassing on an invisible empire. Luca Moretti's investigation had reached a point where the present offered only dead ends. Anyone connected to Valenti Holdings spoke through rehearsed phrases, generic emails, or polite stonewalling. So he turned to the past. If the modern Valentis hid themselves too well, perhaps their ancestors had left traces before the family perfected its invisibility. His search led him deep into the archives of the National Library in Rome. Dusty journals, disintegrating financial reports, and forgotten newspaper clippings slowly revealed a name that appeared again and again, never as a headline, never with fanfare, but always hovering in the background of Italy's major economic turning points, Bianca Valenti. Bianca was a financial strategist active in the 1960s through the 1980s. Though even active felt like an exaggeration. There were no interviews, no photographs, no quotes. Yet in confidential memos and internal government records, Bianca's name surfaced in an almost prophetic way. One file described her as a consultant with extraordinarily accurate market forecasts. Another hinted she had advised multiple banks during Italy's inflation crisis. Some documents referred to her only as the Florentine mathematician, The more Luca read, the more a picture formed, not of a public figure, but of a hidden architect. Bianca seemed to possess a rare ability. She predicted market shifts before they happened. According to a retired banker, Luca tracked down a man in his 80s named Giovanni Scalzi. Bianca had developed a private economic model that could anticipate cascading financial reactions with eerie precision. She saw things other economists couldn't, Giovanni said, his wrinkled hands trembling as he stirred his espresso. Patterns no one else noticed. It was like she could glimpse the future a few days before it arrived. If she hadn't intervened in '79, the bank would have collapsed. Italy might have spiraled. Giovanni leaned closer and whispered, but she demanded anonymity. No credit, no recognition. Stability before ego, she always said. The phrase echoed in Luca's mind like a riddle. Bianca died in 1996. Officially, she left behind no children. Yet Giovanni insisted. Bianca had a granddaughter, an elusive figure whispered about in banking circles during the early 2000s, a financial prodigy, a ghost. Every description began with "I heard" and ended with "but no one has ever confirmed it." The name attached to these rumors was Isabella Valenti. Luca tried searching for Isabella. Nothing. No academic records. No legal documents. No property holdings. It was like chasing someone who had chosen to exist only in the spaces between data points. But the whispers were consistent. Isabella had inherited Bianca's model and increased its power. With modern computing and insider access to economic data, she allegedly turned it into something formidable. An algorithm capable of shaping investment flows, predicting political reactions, and identifying exactly where economic pressure could reshape an entire industry. If true, the implications were staggering. A single family operating in secrecy possessing a predictive tool with the potential to steer an entire nation's economic fate. Back in his apartment, Luca stared at Bianca's notes, scanned from old documents. Handwritten formulas, obscure annotations, and diagrams of market cycles filled the pages. At the bottom of one sheet, almost invisible, was a message in delicate script. A true guide leaves no footprints. The phrase matched everything Luca had uncovered. The Valentis didn't want power recognized, they wanted power exercised without attention. And someone somewhere was still using Bianca's blueprint. Someone named Isabella. Luca Moretti had expected resistance. Maybe cold shoulders from bureaucrats or veiled threats from corporate spokespeople. But what he hadn't expected was silence, an impenetrable wall of it. Every government office he contacted redirected him to another department. Every bank claimed it had no record of consulting Bianca Valenti. Every economist he approached refused to speak on the record, offering only nervous smiles and quick goodbyes. It was too coordinated to be coincidence. Just when Luca began to wonder whether his investigation was reaching an artificial dead end, a message appeared on his personal phone. "Stop digging, Moretti. For your own sake." No sender, no trace. He deleted it, but his pulse hammered. Hours later, his editor called, sounding unusually tense. "Luca, maybe shift your focus. There's an upcoming interview with the agriculture minister. Do that instead." Luca asked why. The line went silent. Then, with a resigned sigh, his editor said, "Some topics are bigger than newspapers. Leave this one alone," and hung up. For Luca, that wasn't a warning, it was confirmation. He was finally getting close. The next morning, as he walked to his car, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street, tinted windows. Engine running. It didn't follow him immediately. But later that day, when he left a coffee shop, it was behind him again. Keeping distance. Always there. Always watching. That night, while he reviewed files in his apartment, someone buzzed at his door. When he peered through the peephole, a woman in a central bank uniform stood outside, looking unusually nervous. He opened the door cautiously. "My name doesn't matter," she said, shifting her weight, hands trembling slightly. "But I work where you've been calling." She looked over her shoulder before continuing. "They know you're looking into the Valentis. And they're not happy." Luca felt the room tilt. "Why come to me?" "Because someone has to," she whispered. She handed him a small USB drive. "This is just a fraction of what I've seen. If I'm caught, I'll deny everything. But you need to understand the Valentis aren't outsiders meddling in the economy. They're inside it, integrated, quiet, but everywhere." Before Luca could ask another question, she turned and hurried down the hallway, almost running. Heart pounding, Luca plugged the USB into a spare laptop. Inside were encrypted files, financial transfers, internal memos, audio recordings from closed-door meetings. After 2 hours of decoding, a chilling narrative emerged. The Valenti family had influenced sovereign debt negotiations, intervened in real estate collapses, and subtly guided energy policy. Not publicly, not officially, but through strategic pressure applied at exactly the right moments. They weren't manipulating Italy through brute force, they were steering it, like a pilot guiding a ship through fog. The evidence was undeniable. At 1:12 a.m., while Luca was sorting through the files, his phone vibrated. A new message appeared. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." No signature. No number. And then a second ping. "Let's talk." Attached was a location pin, an abandoned rail depot on the outskirts of Rome. Luca stared at the screen, aware he was standing on the knife's edge between truth and danger. He had wanted answers. Now he had them. But the cost of knowing was only beginning. Luca Moretti did not go to the abandoned rail depot. Every instinct screamed that the message was a trap and intimidation tactic disguised as an invitation. Instead, he spent the night analyzing the data on the USB drive, following the digital footprints left by the Valenti economic machine. What he found was far more alarming than anything he had imagined. Buried deep inside the encrypted folders was a reference to an offshore fund called Aurelia Capital, headquartered in a country known for strict banking secrecy. The account appeared dormant at first glance, with minimal recorded activity. But when Luca cross-referenced dates from the USB files, he noticed something subtle. The fund always made a large, precisely timed investment right before an Italian industrial crisis turned around, not after before. Aurelia Capital didn't react to the market. It anticipated it, sometimes by mere hours. The fund's login was protected by an unusual password hint, Renaissance sequence. Panel 3. Luca's mind instantly snapped to the cryptic habits of Bianca Valenti, the mathematician who loved obscurity. It took him hours of searching art archives before he realized the key probably referred to a specific painting sequence in Florence, likely one of the works connected to the Medici, another family famous for its financial prowess. When he finally cracked the password, his victory felt hollow. Inside the Aurelia Capital server were thousands of document scanned files, letters, flowcharts, and strategic guidelines. One document stood out, a manifesto titled, "The Principle of Invisible Stewardship." It appeared to be written by Bianca herself sometime in the 1980s. Its opening line chilled him. Guidance is strongest when unseen. The manifesto was a treatise on economic stability, arguing that true prosperity required removing critical decisions from political volatility and public sentiment. It detailed how a small, disciplined group with superior forecasting ability could prevent collapses, correct imbalances, and gently steer a nation toward long-term growth. It wasn't domination. The document insisted it was quiet guardianship. Similar files showed how the Valentis applied this philosophy, stepping in when crises brewed, propping up industries, merging companies, or withdrawing capital exactly when instability would force reforms. They believed they were Italy's insurance policy, a family of silent custodians ensuring the country didn't fall into chaos. Then, in a subfolder marked only with the initials IV, Luca found recent activity logs, names of politicians, cabinet meeting schedules, market reaction models predicting how specific policy choices would shift public sentiment. At the center of all these models was one name, Isabella Valenti. Unlike Bianca, Isabella used algorithms tied to real-time economic and behavioral data. Her models simulated months of market activity in minutes, mapping how a single decision from a minister could cause chain reactions across Europe. She wasn't just forecasting the economy, she was orchestrating it. Determined to confirm this, Luca returned to the Valenti villa under cover of night. He avoided the main gate, climbing through a break in the stone wall along the vineyard. He crept through the shadows, heart pounding, expecting security guards at any moment. But he didn't find guards. He found her. A woman stood on the terrace, silhouetted by warm golden light, calm, still, watching the horizon like someone surveying a kingdom. "Good evening, Signor Moretti," she said without turning. Her voice was smooth, controlled. "I've been expecting you." Luca froze. She knew his name. She knew he would come. "I suppose," she continued, finally facing him, "you've discovered our work." It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation to listen. And the most dangerous thing of all was how reasonable she sounded. Luca Moretti had spent his career exposing lies, not listening to the people who told them. Yet as he stood on the terrace of the Valenti villa, facing Isabella Valenti, the invisible architect of Italy's economic fate, he felt something he hadn't expected: uncertainty. Isabella motioned for him to follow her into a quiet study lined with old maps, leather-bound ledgers, and framed charts of market cycles stretching back centuries. No guards, no threats. Just a woman with eyes sharp enough to cut through him. "You think we manipulate Italy," Isabella began, her tone calm, almost sympathetic. "But we prevent it from destroying itself." Luca didn't answer. She took a seat at a massive wooden desk and opened a folder filled with documents. "These," she said, sliding the papers toward him, "are decisions your elected officials almost made. Decisions that would have triggered unemployment spikes, foreign takeovers, pension freezes. We intervened quietly, not for profit. For stability." Luca scanned the pages. They looked legitimate internal memos, projected economic collapses, catastrophic volatility charts. But legitimacy wasn't the same as morality. "Who gave you the right to do this?" he asked. "No one," Isabella replied. "And that is precisely why we're effective." She stood and gestured toward a wall covered in timelines and branching diagrams. "My grandmother Bianca understood a truth most economists spend their lives avoiding. Markets don't behave rationally. They behave predictably irrationally. If you understand the irrationality, you can steer it." Her voice softened. I refined her model. "It's not perfect, but it can forecast the future with enough accuracy to prevent disaster." She paused. "And sometimes, to encourage change where politicians will not." Luca felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "You're admitting to controlling the economy." "I'm admitting to guiding it," Isabella corrected. "The way a lighthouse guides ships. We shine the light. Others choose whether to steer into it." She returned to her desk and folded her hands. "You now have enough evidence to expose everything. The model. The network. Our influence. If you publish it all, Italy will erupt in panic. The markets will convulse. People will lose their savings. And another family, or worse, a corporation will step in to fill the vacuum. You cannot destroy us without destroying stability." It was a masterful argument, not manipulative, but maddeningly reasonable. "And if I don't?" Luca asked. "Then you tell the world what you can responsibly reveal." Isabella's expression carried no arrogance, only certainty. "Expose our existence if you must. But do not expose the mechanism. The model cannot fall into the wrong hands. She walked past him without waiting for his answer, as though she already knew the decision he would make. Good night, Signor Moretti. I trust your judgment. Italy always has. The next morning, Luca returned to Rome carrying more truth than he had ever held and more doubt. He spent days wrestling with the evidence, pacing his apartment, reading and rereading the files. The journalist in him screamed to publish everything. The citizen in him feared the consequences. And in the end, he chose the only path that didn't feel like surrender: partial revelation. He published an expose revealing the existence of the Valenti family, a silent dynasty that had subtly shaped Italy as economic direction for generations. He described their philosophy of invisible stewardship, but omitted the predictive model and the sensitive data that could plunge the nation into chaos. The story went viral. Some called it fiction. Some demanded inquiries. Some blamed Luca for fear-mongering. The government released a brief statement denying everything, and the Valentis? Nothing. No rebuttal. No confirmation. Just silence. A week later, Luca awoke to find a letter slipped under his door. No logo. No signature. Just 5 handwritten words. You chose well. I.V. He stared at the note long after the sun rose, realizing that even after exposure, the Valenti influence hadn't wavered. Powers didn't crumble when revealed. They merely stepped back into the shadows and continued steering the nation as they always had.